So here are 7 things that you should never ever say to your mechanic. People often say these things in the hope that they'll be treated differently, they'll get a better job done or a cheaper job done. But in reality, it just winds the mechanic up and you can actually be making things much more difficult for yourself. Some of these statements or questions will just annoy your mechanic. It'll maybe create a situation where they don't trust you. And it might be one of those red flags that just indicates that you are that nightmare customer. And when you go back, you may find they're just too busy to book you in. So let's avoid these common situations or pitfalls that people fall into when talking to a mechanic. And it'll just ensure that your car repair experience goes as smoothly as possible. So the key is always to find a good mechanic. If you treat them with honesty and respect, they will act likewise with you and treat you with respect and be honest in their dealings with you. So the first red flag is don't lie. So the common situation is you've done something stupid and you've broken the car. Don't just turn up at the mechanic and say, I don't know what's going on here, it's just being a bit weird, because the information you're holding back could save a lot of time in diagnosis. And the mechanic doesn't really care. You could have driven your car into a brick wall for all he cares. He's not going to hold it against you. We all do stupid things in the car. So put your hand up and just say, I revved the engine too high, or I forgot to check the oil level, or I caused this problem by doing something silly in the car that I won't ever do again, honest. So a lot of people go into the garage or the workshop and their opening line is, I'm a mechanic. Well, the mechanic straight away is thinking, well, if you're a mechanic, why don't you repair the car yourself? Why are you coming to me? It's clearly outside your area of expertise, your wheelhouse. You don't have the tools, you don't have the experience. So you're not going to get a better service by saying you're a mechanic. Straight away, you're indicating that you mistrust this mechanic and you're saying to him, I've got knowledge, so don't try and rip me off. That's not really a good opener to your conversation with a new mechanic, is it? So another common mistake is people go into the mechanic and they tell the mechanic exactly what's wrong with the car and what needs fixing because they read it on a forum. They found an article online that seems to relate to their problem or their experience. The mechanic is a professional. He will use his experience to diagnose the fault. We wouldn't turn up to our doctors, although some people do this, and just tell the doctor what's wrong with you and expect him to prescribe medication upon that self-diagnosis, because you're not a doctor yourself. You're not a mechanic, so don't make that diagnosis yourself. What the mechanic really needs to know is exactly what's wrong with the car, what the symptoms are that you're experiencing, any noises, any unusual judders, at what engine speeds and what RPMs it tends to happen, whether it's you're driving along where you pull away or when you come up to stop. These all help the mechanic drill down to identify the problem very quickly and very easily. If you've misdiagnosed and he's searching for parts and he's replacing parts on your recommendation and it doesn't turn out to be that, that's your fault. That's not the mechanic's fault. And you've paid all that time for the mechanic to investigate and replace the item when it was completely unnecessary, and the money would have been better spent diagnosing that fault or problem properly. So the opposite is where you turn up to the garage or the mechanic and you just say, I don't know what's wrong with it, it's just being a bit weird. You're basically writing a blank check, if you will, giving unfettered access to your bank account. An unscrupulous mechanic will find lots of problems with your car that will need quite expensive repairs. So it's best to just give an indication. You don't know what the cause is usually, but you know the car is juddering or pulling to one side, or it's stalling, or it's misfiring, or there's some other issue. So again, don't just turn up expecting the mechanic to diagnose everything on the car and fix it, because often unnecessary work is carried out and you're just wasting your money. Now, don't try and stitch up the mechanic. Some people might turn up and they might say the engine's knocking it. I think it's the engine mount. Can you give me a quote for the engine mount? And then when the mechanic starts looking, he discovers it's a much more serious problem than the engine mount. And then the customer says, well, you quoted me this much to fix the engine mount, so why is my bill now this high? Don't do that. Don't fall into that trap. Let the mechanic diagnose the problem. Just give him the symptoms and don't send him off on a wild goose chase or try and get a lower quote for a repair, knowing yourself that it's probably more involved and there's more stuff going on behind the scenes. A mechanic's time is valuable. You are paying for a professional, or hopefully you're paying for a professional to work on your car and diagnose the fault as quickly as possible. I've often found that going to the slightly more expensive garage often results in a cheaper overall job because they've got to the problem more quickly. They've not had this expensive trial and error replace everything until they find the thing that was playing up. So most good mechanics will want to inspect the car. They won't give you a quote on the basis of what you think is wrong. So you can have a theoretical discussion. What's your hourly rate? How much would it cost you to change this? I think that's wrong with my car. And then the mechanic goes away and he will do a diagnosis. Now, this is really why I don't give one-to-one advice in this channel and on the website, because I can't inspect the car. You're completely reliant on what the customer or your website visitor is telling you about their car. And they may have missed off a significant detail that seemed insignificant to them, but it can completely change the diagnosis or the problem. So I'll always try and point people in the right direction, but it's impossible to give advice, make recommendations, or give firm quotes on the basis of what someone is saying is wrong with the car or what they need. So the other approach is that passive aggressive or just downright aggressive. You go into the garage or the mechanic and you say, I sued my last mechanic, or I punched my last mechanic because he did this or didn't do this, or he tried to rip me off. Now that in your head is probably making you look like someone that shouldn't be messed with. You're expecting to be treated with respect. But if you were on the receiving end of that, how would you react? You would probably not want to have any dealings with someone that is coming at you this aggressively right out of the gate before they've even established a rapport or relationship with you as a mechanic. So if someone came to me and they were passively aggressive or threatening or indicating that they would carry out this course of action if I didn't fix their problem, I wouldn't want anything to do with it. Those sorts of characters are nothing but trouble. They will often have unrealistically high expectations, very shallow pockets, and be incredibly critical of anything that you do to the car. Another thing you should never say to the mechanic, although it is tempting, it didn't do that until you touched it. So you've taken your car in to have a wheel fixed, and the exhaust is starting to make a noise. So you go back to the mechanic because it genuinely didn't do that before the mechanic touched it. Does that mean the mechanic broke it deliberately to make work for himself? Well, there may be an unscrupulous mechanic out there that does that sort of thing, but in the main, it's completely innocent. I've worked on my car myself, and I've noticed that I've maybe knocked a wire that was slightly frayed and it's broken. I've moved a pipe and the pipe has become split or detached or has failed shortly after I've worked on the engine. So car engines get quite brittle and quite sensitive over time. So it's quite common, with the best will in the world, with the ultimate professionalism that you would expect of a good quality mechanic, to uncover a problem that was there before but not fully evident until you moved something. So cut the mechanic some slack. He's trying to help you. He didn't create work for himself. If you notice a pattern of this always happening and strange faults developing, then you may have a dodgy mechanic. But build up that good rapport with your mechanic. A good mechanic is like gold dust. If you've got one, keep hold of them, treat them with respect and dignity. They often like biscuits and chocolates and drinks as well. So if you just supply maybe a 4-pack when they've done the job, that goes a long way to endearing them to you, and they'll treat you with respect and honesty. So finding a good mechanic is a challenge. I've often found that the one-man operation are more keen to protect their reputation. It's one guy, he's not relying on someone else. There's no buck passing that goes on. So it's down to him really to fix the car, deal with the problem and deal with the customer. So I've had good experiences with these one-man operations. Some franchise dealers are a problem. Some are very good and they train their staff and they're very, very focused on the quality of care and standards that they meet. But some have to meet targets and budgets. They employ untrained mechanics that are often trainees. There's no real quality control going on there, and you get lots of weird problems and situations just because the auto shop or the garage is prepared in dealing with customers, and they have no set workflow. It's a very haphazard approach to fixing. So what about main dealers, franchises, and the main dealerships? Well, you will expect better service. You're paying a lot more, and they are just working on your brand of car. So generally speaking, a franchise dealer can dismantle and reassemble the car, and they won't have caused little scratches or scuffs that you often get where someone's inexperienced at maybe removing a panel and they've tried a few different options. The franchise mechanics are generally very well trained and they can do the work efficiently and effectively. But I've had bad service from franchise dealerships. Some franchise dealerships, my local Audi, for example, a few years back, it just felt like they were only interested in the 3-year-old cars and people that had money to go out and buy new cars. They weren't interested in looking after anything older than that. They really gave you the brush off, the implication that they weren't interested. But you often get what you pay for, even with franchise garages and main dealers. Do your research, ask around. If you've got a good local one to you, use them. And your best bet is often to find a local specialist, someone who specializes in your brand of car. They might be a German specialist, they might be an Audi Volkswagen specialist. They may just specialize in your Volkswagen Golf or whatever model of car that you've got. So if that's the case, they've built up an expertise, they know a lot of the quirks, and that can often make diagnosing problems a lot quicker. They're not trying to understand a whole new range of issues. Most cars have got common weak spots and weak areas, which I do try and cover in the videos when we go over specific engines, but having that little bit of knowledge can make a big difference to the speed of repair. So please boot that like button, that really does help us to get out there. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We'd love you to stay tuned, and I've lined this video up for you that you should find really interesting. See you in this next video.